Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about Agatha All Along, and we'll present an interview with that show's showrunner, Jac Schaeffer. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film editor, BJ Colangelo.
Hiya.
All right, BJ, before we get into Agatha, I wanted to give a quick plug for a piece that you wrote recently on the site. You had the chance to visit Walt Disney Animation Studios and get an early look at Moana 2, and I will link to 7 things that every Disney fan needs to know about this movie that you wrote up for the site. So we're going to be talking about this more in detail when the movie actually comes out around Thanksgiving. I think we're going to probably have the opportunity to run some audio from some interviews that you did that day, but I was just curious if there's any takeaways that you had that you wanted to share with people now to potentially get them jazzed about the sequel.
Sure thing. So one of the big takeaways is that Moana has a little sister now. Her name is, I can't remember the pronunciation, if it's Samia or Samea. My apologies on that. But she is much younger than Moana. She's like a toddler. So cute. Immediately fell in love with her. I think it adds like such an interesting dynamic shift with Moana. And the other big takeaway is that I was really hesitant going into it because Moana 2 was originally supposed to be a series for Disney Plus that was then turned into the feature film. And so I was a little worried that maybe it was going to, feel like the story wasn't all there, or maybe the animation would look cheaper. And that is just simply not the case. It is as beautiful as you can imagine. It's going to look gorgeous on the big screen and is going to be a lot of fun for families when it hits around Thanksgiving.
Excellent. Okay, so more on that later. But yeah, I'll link in the show notes to that article that you wrote in case people are curious and want to check that out now and sort of get prepared for that. So I wanted to take this opportunity today to do a temperature check on Marvel Studios' Agatha All Along with you before we get to the finale, which goes up on Disney Plus tomorrow, which is October 30th, in case you're listening to this a little bit later. I have not watched any of this show yet, but I know that you have. So without getting into spoilers quite yet, what do you think about this show so far?
So the thing that I have enjoyed the most about Agatha All Along is that while it absolutely does factor in some of the threads of, say, WandaVision and some of the greater MCU, it still very much feels like its own thing. If you are somebody who is perhaps just into like witchy stuff, like you see a movie like Hocus Pocus or Practical Magic as like a comfort watch for you. You can watch Agatha All Along and have a good time without knowing any of the greater MCU lore, which I really think is great for especially like spooky season that we're going into right now. This has been one of my favorite of the Disney Plus shows. Honestly, anything that Jac Schaeffer has made, those are my favorite shows. So, WandaVision and Agatha. I've really, really been impressed by this show. And quite frankly, it's been a little bit of a bummer seeing how little interest there's been from a lot of people who normally are like really big on Marvel who just haven't tuned in. It's giving misogyny, it's giving queerphobia, because this is a very queer and very female forward series. So I don't know what else people want. The show is a lot of fun. It's very interesting. The Marvel lore in it is really cool, and I just don't understand how there are people in this world who were like, "Oh, you have Catherine Hahn and Aubrey Plaza and Patti LuPone. I'm not interested. I don't know who you are, and I don't want to know you."
Well, to play devil's advocate, BJ, I would guess that maybe some people have just been burned one too many times by these Marvel shows, many of which start pretty strong but tend to lose steam as they go along. So I was curious about the pacing of this show and sort of what you make of that, because does this show like fall into that same trap? Or, I mean, I know you haven't seen all of it quite yet, but heading into the finale, what do you think about the pacing so far?
So I really, really enjoy the pacing. I was with some friends this weekend and we were talking about how every episode sort of feels like Marvel doing its own escape room. And then someone took it a step further and they were like, no, this is like PG-13 saw traps, which honestly, that's kind of true. So the first episode is, I don't want to call it like an anti-episode, but it's definitely uh, setting up the world. Agatha is still very much under, the power of everything that we last saw in WandaVision. And so it plays out kind of like a serious drama. It plays out like Mayor of Easttown, like very much like that. And then episode 2 to me, it feels like that is the pilot of Agatha All Along. And then every episode moving forward is a different trial for one of the witches on the witch's road. And so Monster of the Week isn't appropriate, but like it sort of follows a very similar formula of each week one of the witches is going to be tested, and each week it's going to have sort of a different look aesthetically. Each week is going to feel very inspired by different like a different TV show or a different sort of like pop culture corner. Like one week very much feels like Big Little Lies, one week very much feels like Daisy Jones and the Six, one week very much feels like The Evil Dead. Like it's very cool how you get like these little treats every week of something very new, but at the same time the story is still cohesive, it's moving forward. There's been some really big reveals in the last couple of episodes. This most recent episode 7, I think that's going to be their Emmy push episode. Like genuinely, I think if they're putting any episode out there for Emmy contention, it's going to be that one.
Wow. Okay. So I was wondering about what you said earlier about the first episode being the sort of Mayor of Easttown parody. And I was looking at the run times, and it's like a 42-minute episode. And so part of my hesitation was I knew that that was the format going in, was that first episode was sort of, like you said, the introduction back into this world or whatever. But if episode 2 is kind of in your view, the real pilot, can people just jump to episode 2, or is there information contained within episode 1 that you really need to know in order to enjoy the show?
So what is very interesting, and this is obviously no spoilers, but if you watched WandaVision, then you know a lot of that story deals with people's sort of perspective of what they think is happening and their idea of reality is being manipulated. And that is very much what this episode 1 is. So there are a lot of callbacks to episode 1 scattered throughout the series, but flipped from another perspective now that reality is not being manipulated. So you see that situation in entirely new lights, and it's kind of masterful, honestly. Like there's a very good conversation in episode 1 between Catherine Hahn's Agatha and Joe Locke's Teen, that we then are revisited later down the line without reality being manipulated, and you see like what actually happened in that conversation and how it really played out, and it really makes that first episode even more powerful. So I like you could skip it, but I think that you would be losing something if you did.
Okay, that makes sense. And that's actually a pretty good pitch for me to finally maybe watch the show, because I was kind of like, man, I don't know if I want to spend 45 minutes watching an episode that's basically just one joke or one sort of aesthetic choice, and then only to have the rug pulled out from you and like, oh, it's not actually Mare of Easttown, it's a whole new show kind of thing. Like, yeah, I know that already. Like I'm here to watch WandaVision, but from what you're saying, it sounds like what actually happens in that is more sort of integral to the plot. So that makes me much more eager to actually spend that time watching that episode instead of just being like, yeah, get on with it kind of thing. So, okay, so let's now get into spoilers. Don't worry about me, BJ, but are there any spoilery aspects of the show that you wanted to highlight or shout out? Any big moments or scenes that you think work especially well?
Oh, yeah. So we talk about it a lot in this interview that everyone will hear with Jac Schaeffer. So I guess also if you're going to listen to that interview, spoilers. But the most recent episode is the Patti LuPone focused episode of Lilia, her character Lilia. And throughout the series, Lilia has had these little moments where she's kind of like said something that doesn't super fit what's going on. And everyone's like, what the fuck, Lilia? Like, what are you doing here? And there's like these little moments like that. And we get the reveal in this most recent episode that she has been experiencing her life out of order, in that when she was younger, she was having visions of, her life much older. And now that she's older, she's randomly having visions of her life from when she was younger. But it's not like they're flashbacks or flash forwards. Like she's experiencing them in real time out of order. And so then
it's almost like Desmond from Lost when he's
yes, it's
exactly time hops or whatever.
Yeah, it's exactly like that. And I talk about that with Jack in the interview. Like Memento is a big deal for her. Lost is a big deal for her. Arrival is a big deal for her. And so you see a lot of that in this character where all of a sudden all these moments that were like, what are you talking about, you crazy old woman, are like, oh no, this is what's happening. And it is very poetic and very beautiful and very like touching to watch this episode play out. That was a really huge reveal. Obviously, learning the identity of Teen actually being Billy Maximoff is like a big deal. And the fact that it's not as easy as like, oh, this is just Wanda's kid grown up, but this is, you know, Billy inhabiting the body of a kid that already existed. And so now he's got this like struggle identity of like, am I this person I thought I was, or am I Billy Maximoff? Like, who am I? Like, that I think is really, really interesting. Aubrey Plaza's character Rio being revealed as Death is very cool, and that feels like one of the threads that will continue on beyond Agatha and probably into the greater MCU in some way, shape, or form. Unless, I don't know, unless they kill her in the last couple episodes. I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet. But it's been very cool to see how Agatha sort of fits in here. And there are some moments that are genuinely scary. Like Salem 7 they're scary. Like they creep me out. And I like that is part of this very much like Halloween-y sort of show. I think that's a very important distinction, is that Agatha All Along to me is not like like MCU does horror. I think that's not it. It very much is MCU does Halloween. This feels very much in line with something like a Hocus Pocus, a Halloween Town, a Casper. Like it's that sort of realm where it's very fun and it's very spooky, and occasionally there's something that's genuinely kind of scary, but at the same time we're still dealing with like witchy magic superheroes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. And it's actually a pretty good pitch. And I think you finally convinced me to give the show a try. So I
Yes.
think, is the finale going to be a 2-part thing, or is it
Yes.
2 episodes being released at once?
Yes, the finale is a 2-parter, and I think it was just to get it in and done before Halloween, because you know there is always that like weird thing, kind of like how nobody wants to watch a Christmas movie the first week of January. I think a lot of like normies don't want to watch something that feels this Halloweeny after Halloween, and also like having a show the day after an election is like, I don't know if people are gonna be watching things depending on how that turns out. So it is 2 episodes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take a break and then we'll come back and get into your interview with Agatha All Along showrunner Jac Schaeffer.
So if last week's episode does not get nominated for an Emmy, I'm going to learn actual witchcraft and hex the Television Academy. So I'm just giving you that heads up. If something happens later this season, it was 100% my fault.
I mean, listen, BJ, I love a petty witch, so that sounds great.
I usually see myself as more of a vampire, but I'm willing to become a new type of monster if it means that this episode gets an Emmy nomination.
Fantastic. I love it.
So since we have this big reveal that Lily has been living her life out of order, theoretically, could she live forever? Like a thousands of monkeys with thousands of typewriters creating Shakespeare sort of situation, just living different moments forever, because thinking about her being dead puts me in an existential void that I don't want to sit in. So
no, I know it's hard. I mean, I think we all live forever. I mean, I the sort of time is a flat circle thing of everything is happening all at once, and in our own brains, we are able to revisit moments from our lives. We are able to think about the future. We're able to connect to people who have passed. I don't know. I think there is beauty to be found in the acceptance of death. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can sort of reach each other and re-experience things. So I'm like, in terms of the like actual logistics of it, that's something that I can't speak to, but the episode ends the way that it does because I am a hopeful person. And because that little girl's face, so full of promise and so full of optimism, I think it's a parallel to Lilia's face as she's falling, and the fact that we can embody that at the beginning of our lives and at the end of our lives is really beautiful to me.
Absolutely. I think the line about like I was falling or I will fall, that sort of existing, I think there is such a sweet acceptance of that. And given this timeline jumping, was this episode crafted first and then a little bit sprinkled throughout the earlier episodes, or is there just like a giant Lilia web somewhere in the writer's room on how this all connected?
So it was not written first. We wrote chronologically. We broke the season and like did the episodes chronologically. It was the hope that this episode could be done non-linearly. I assigned the episode to two writers
Mhm.
because I knew it would be such a heavy lift. And it was Cam Squires, who is a writer from WandaVision, who's a very seasoned writer, excellent at his craft, and then Gia King, who was our writer's assistant and who was just like knocking it out of the park every day with contributions in the room. And she also is a tarot expert. And so I partnered them and they started working it. And it was an episode that just iterated and iterated and iterated as we went along. But the sort of what we call Lilia bops, the sort of sprinkles throughout the 5 episodes the 6 episodes that precede it. Those were kind of modular. So we would kind of like earmark, we're going to do it here, we're going to do it here, we're going to do it here. And what she actually says and what the interaction was, that kind of shifted. And eventually, like once the scripts were written, then I had to like do a Lilia pass across the episode, like, and like smooth all that out. And then when we got to like filming into prep, it was like, okay, we have to shoot these as we're in these other episodes before we get to 7. So we have to make all these logistical choices. It was a big task.
Well, fortunately, you pulled it off beautifully. And while we're talking about, time, do you have any familiarity at all with queer time theory?
No, oh my gosh, enlighten me.
Okay, so this is incredible because the entire time I'm watching this episode, I was like, this episode operates under queer time theory. And that makes sense because Agatha is such a queer show. But queer
Yes.
time theory is this idea that because things like coming out or transitioning interrupt the progress of like milestones that you would hit in your life, queer people don't exist on a linear timeline the same way that cis people or straight people would, because things like having your first real heartbreak doesn't
Mhm.
happen at the same time depending on where you come out, and we're all on different timelines because we all come out differently. And so watching this episode, I was like, either this is subconscious because there's something inherently queer about witches, or someone in that writer's room understands queer time theory, because that's what this show feels like it's operating on.
Wow, I've never heard that. I don't know. I mean, we had a lot of queer representation in the writers' room. So I can't speak to whether or not there's any awareness in the room. It never came up. That is incredible and really beautiful. And what it makes me think of is something that I struggled with Lilia's arc, is that like ultimately, sorry, there was a fly in here. Ultimately, she is afraid. And I had a hard time with that because I also see her as being the wisest of the group. And to
Mhm.
me, wisdom is operating without fear a lot of the times, or like being able to manage your fear. I
Mhm.
equate those two things. And the way that I was able to tap into her fear is that it was very childlike. Like it was young Lilia being afraid. So
Mhm.
something about the way you articulated that makes me think about how Lilia, even though she is a woman in her 70s, her little girl is very prominent. I mean, and she's
Mhm.
a woman in her 70s, like on her face, but she is over 400 years old inside of the MCU. But that young arrested development little girl
Mhm.
is very, very present. Oh, thank you for sharing that with me. That's fascinating.
Oh, wonderful. And I mean, while we're also still in this thing of time, never in my life thought I would have this opportunity. So I'm going to tell you, but I saw Timer for the first time about a decade ago. And it was when I was in the middle of cancer treatment. And at that time, they thought that it was a terminal diagnosis. I'm obviously still here. It was not a terminal diagnosis, but that movie changed my life in dealing with this idea of destined timelines and sort of saying, pardon the swear, but like it, like live your life. Doesn't matter what you're being told is your timeline. And so I was thinking about that watching this episode and how time has been like this consistent theme in a lot of your work. And I'm just curious where that fascination comes from for you.
I'm so happy that you recovered, and I'm so sorry for the pain that I'm sure you endured, and thank you for sharing that with me. I'm very touched by that. And it really resonates with me. I've been thinking a lot about my obsession with time. I'm so enchanted by stories that deal with time in sort of mind-shaking ways. Arrival is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh yeah.
Memento was a film for me that changed my trajectory as an artist because I didn't know you could be that smart and break story. Like I mean like break story, like
Oh
break it
yeah.
into. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to break it and then put it back together again. Lost was another one that I was just like, I am dazzled over and over again. I am gasping every episode. I am leaning forward every episode. I have to use the fullness of my brain to follow this, and it is so rewarding. So it's the mechanics of it that I love, but I think the emotional part of it is yeah, it's me making sense of my time here.
Mhm.
I am a fearful person. I spent a lot of my life being really too preoccupied with my own mortality. I'm surprised I'm still here and feel really grateful. And like everyone, I've lost people. Um, and I think about them all the time. And yeah, I don't know. It's just I feel I'm in process is the
Mhm.
answer. I feel I'm in process, and it's the way I'm trying to make sense of what it means to be here.
I love that. That's the answer I was hoping I was going to be getting. And so thinking about, this season and it's operating with different timelines. It's also operating with, within the larger MCU multiverse, all of that fun stuff. But at the same time, Agatha definitely feels like it's still its own sort of isolated thing. Like there's MCU fans and then there's Agatha fans, so to speak. And so I'm curious when you're crafting this world, what space are you given to decide these are through lines that I want to pull from existing MCU to fit into my story, or these are things that I would like to include in my story that these threads might get woven into things later down the line, but that's for someone else to figure out.
Mhm.
How do you determine what gets to be included?
Um, I mean, I have sort of an internal compass of what interests me and what I want to put in the world. I take that really seriously. I have children. I'm interested in leaving the world a better place. Like I am interested in I have uh, I want to see women on screen. I want to see representation. So I have a lot of agenda that is about the people that I want to honor in my life. So that's my personal stuff. In terms of the sort of the larger MCU, there are things, it is always a conversation. My executive producer, Mary Lavanos, and I are really close and have a terrific sort of line of communication. And she is my Marvel sort of truth speaker. She understands both the studio itself and the comics. She has great taste and a real she's very soulful and is really interested in the deep work. And then Brad Winderbaum has been such an advocate for the show, and then it's always conversations with Kevin. So there's larger like the Billy Maximoff piece was Mary who was like, we should do this. And then I locked in on it because I love this corner of the MCU. And
Mhm.
I like my personal taste. I love a small town story. Like I love a weird small town story. And I love Stephen King, Buffy, this sort of sense of place and an ensemble. And I love reusing an ensemble, and I love the thrill of seeing them come back again. I love these townsfolk. So I feel really passionately about this little corner that we were able to sort of carve out in WandaVision. But I do want I have enough of an ego that I want our stories to be of consequence. So like I do embrace the threads that lead into other properties, and I wish them well. Like I'm so excited to see where these characters and these storylines go. Does that answer your question? I got really
Oh
off on
yeah.
myself.
No, totally. And I mean, right now there's been a lot of, conversations. I'm chronically online, unfortunately. And there've been a lot of conversations about how everyone's like, if they do anything else ever again with Agatha or Wanda or any of like, this team needs to be in charge of it, whether it's a series or a movie. Like, we don't care. Just like, don't let anyone else touch these characters. So my question for you is like, if you got to do more, would you do more? Or do you feel like your time with these characters has come to an end?
I don't have an answer, truthfully. I will say that I believe in this team. I feel honored to be working with these people, with everyone, the writers' room, Mary Lavanos, Brad, and then, our production team, and specifically the performers. I mean, let's be clear, like
Mhm.
these stories would not pop without these performers. Catherine Hahne's revelation, Lizzie Olsen is like the most luminous creature ever to walk the planet. Um, uh, but I don't believe that in the MCU that like any one person has to like continue the thing. What I believe is the characters need to be respected.
Mhm.
That's it.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I'm glad that you brought up the performers because as a queer person, as a theater gay, as a comedy fan, like this cast is ridiculous. Like this is one of those casts when, new project is announced and everybody starts fan casting and it's like, yeah, all right, you're not going to get all of those people. You got all of those people.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
this cast started developing, did you ever have a moment where you're like, oh my God, I got all of them?
Every damn day, every day. I was like, are we here right now? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And still don't. I saw Patty LuPone last night and was still like, Patty LuPone like looks at me and knows my name. Like right? She like talks to my face. I just can't believe it. Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm so delighted. And Sarah Finn, casting director, is so good at her job, and is also a lovely person who cares about the projects and wants the best for the projects. And she made this happen, and it was a long, long process. And we got, all of her attention and dedication. And yeah, the gift of this cast, I can't. It's too much.
I'm glad that you're honest about this because every once in a while I'll interview somebody and they're like, oh, they're just actors doing their job. And I'm like, shut up. That's Patty LuPone. Like, are you kidding me? You have to act like it's
Dude,
impossible not
they're
to fangirl.
witches. They are witches. They're all witches. Like I was working with superheroes over and over
Right.
again.
Right. Like, you can't be normal about that. Um,
No, no, ever.
So I have time for one last question, and obviously we're not going to talk spoilers or anything, but when Agatha All Along does come to an end, what are you hoping the audience takes away as their like main feeling or message from the series?
I really should have an answer for that. I think I I don't know. I want people, I guess if I were to sort of like articulate it, I want people to have that feeling where you've got like tears brimming and you get the chills and you're holding your breath, and and then you like look to the person that you're watching with and the watch ended and you have so much to talk about. That's, that's the way I would describe it. That's the way I would describe it.
Well, that
Yeah.
has been how I've ended like 4 of these episodes. So you're already on the right track. You can count on me at least being one of those people who will do that for you.
Oh, that's great to hear. Thank you.
All right, any closing thoughts on this show, BJ? I think, like I said, you did a pretty good job of trying to pitch people on it, but any other stray thoughts that you wanted to mention here? This might be the last time that we talk about the show on the podcast for a while.
Sure. So the last stray thought that I have is actually like not super related to Agatha All Along, but in the interview I talk about Jac Schaeffer's debut feature Timer, and Timer is currently like, so if you're listening to this episode, around the same time, it is currently available on Prime Video. This movie is one of those weird ones that will end up on streaming for a couple of months and then disappear for like a year. So if you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. It is a science fiction rom-com. I guess that's the way I could put it. It's more science fiction romance, but it is funny. But it is set in a world where people get these timers implanted in their wrists that tell you when you are going to meet your soulmate. And so it ends up, you know, kind of controlling and dictating how everybody lives their lives, because you have the people who are like, I'm going to be as reckless as possible, you know, until the day I'm going to meet my soulmate, and then I'm going to like grow up and settle down. Or you have the people who are like, I'm not meeting my soulmate until I'm 60, so I'm going to do whatever I want until then. And then you have the people whose timers haven't turned on yet because their partner hasn't gotten a timer yet. So now they're just like going on every first date possible and taking them to get their timer installed to see if they're soulmates. And if they're not soulmates on their first date, then they don't go on that date again. And so it's this really fascinating look at the idea of destiny and fate and what you choose to do with it, even if you have the answer to like, what is happily ever after? Do you follow it or do you rebel against it? I think it is so fascinating. And I think that it is such an interesting movie, especially when you look at the way that Jac Schaeffer's Marvel shows, especially WandaVision and Agatha All Along, deal with time. Like, it all makes sense when you watch it together. So watch that before it goes away again, because who knows when it'll come back to streaming.
Okay, great recommendation there. The movie is called Timer, so check that out on Prime Video. I think that's going to do it for today's episode of the show. You can find more about Agatha All Along and Moana 2 at slashfilm.com. I will link to those things in the show notes as well. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really helps us out a lot. Tell your friends about this show any way you can. Thanks so much.